in relation to the clause on accessible cities. We're going to take now. Guys, just so you're aware, because there are a number of deputations and there's some more, another one at 12 o'clock today, I'm going to put the 10-minute timeline up so that you're aware of it, but it will also include any questions. So the 10-minute thing that you can see on the clock is your speaking time, but includes the provision for any questions as well. So we're all clear on that. And the first one I have is Glenn's Corey. Thanks, Glenn. This is in relation to clause 32 of the agenda. What I intend to do, just for the community board chairs who are here, is listen to all the deputations and then take the community board chairs, because I know some of you need to be away, and then go back to this item. Okay, thanks, Glenn. We're in your hands.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Glenn Curry. I'm representing Spokes Canterbury today. On behalf of Spokes Canterbury, we aim to represent the people who make already about 50,000 cycle trips a day around the city, the 50% of Christchurch residents who already typically ride a bike at least once a year, and indeed the greater proportion of people that we feel would like to cycle or would like to cycle more, but are currently concerned with the environment that's out there at the moment. So we're very supportive of the general plans for what's coming up in Christchurch here. So I wish to speak to item 32 today, the accessible transport one. There's two main aspects that I'd like to speak to, and then happy to take some questions. Firstly, the Selwyn Street cycle lanes and the Hagley Park shared pathway. So firstly, Selwyn Street. You may recall the original proposal had cycle lanes in the section of Selwyn Street from Hagley Ave to Morehouse Ave, and the new proposal has taken them away. We felt they did make sense to have them in there because you were going to have more traffic, more buses being directed down what is now effectively an arterial route connection to Morehouse Ave. And generally the rule has been with arterial roads, parking is a privilege. It's never been a right there. And so that's the principle that I think we should be applying in this situation. Now we acknowledge that there are going to be improvements either side. Grove Road and Antigua Street are going to be major cycleway routes and are going to see improvements along there. But you're still going to have some demand for cycling down Selwyn Street as well, particularly to access points of Addington and Spraydon as well. And so without doing any treatments there, you're going to have more traffic on Selwyn Street. Basically, you're going to make conditions worse for those who are still choosing to cycle down Selwyn Street there. I know local businesses in this vicinity have concerns about the parking. I would have thought local businesses, certainly of the type that I observed there, would have been expected to have sufficient off-street parking for both their staff and their customers. That's Basic District Plan 101. And so an expectation of on-street parking does seem out of step with there. I also noticed actually when I looked at this morning, I actually suspect a lot of the on-street parking there is actually coming from further away as well. It's reasonably close to town. It's unlimited parking at the moment, and I suspect people using perhaps the hospital, the college or other destinations around town, they're seeing that as convenient all-day parking. It's less about the businesses immediately there actually. If you do decide to retain the on-street parking as being proposed in the note today, we'd request that at the very least you retain the cycle facilities that were proposed at the intersection of Selwyn Street and Morehouse. I should note that 2/3 of all urban cycle crashes happen at intersections. They are the most critical parts of the network. Certainly when I cycle down Selwyn Street, the mid-blocks are usually not a big problem, but somewhere like Selwyn Morehouse is uncomfortable, is problematic at the moment, and will continue to do so if not much is done to it. I see there are plans to be some proposed advanced stop boxes still at the intersections. That's really not going to be enough on its own unless you've got a safe way to get to them. So I would suggest at least having the cycle lanes leading up to the intersection be retained. And as far as I can see, that would only affect about 2 or 3 of the car parks that are currently there and could still retain the others if that was your decision from there. So I'll finish the Selwyn Street with just that key point that I would like to see at least the intersections for cycle facilities retained. We as Spokes would certainly prefer to see the original proposal maintained with the cycle lanes in their entirety. Turning to the Hagley Park shared paths now. Now we understand that there's a lot of concerns about conflicts on the shared paths as they stand. I can appreciate that. I cycle through there every day to work and it certainly frustrates me when I have to sort of work my way through other joggers, walkers, bikers, you name it, going through. So there's a lot of common conflicts going through there. However, I would acknowledge that most people's experiences at the moment are due to the fact that in Christchurch we've never really provided proper shared paths to meet the actual peak demands that are there. It'd be a bit like making Blenheim Road 6 metres wide and then wondering why there's lots of conflict and congestion. That's pretty much what we're trying to do on some of our busier shared pathways at the moment. So it's not surprising that we see a lot of this conflict as it stands. If I look around the whole city, in fact, I'd say in my assessment there's probably only about 2 shared paths in the entire city that I would consider are adequate for the current demand that's on them, and none of them are in Hagley Park. So I think when we're looking at a 4 metre proposal wide shared path, it's quite a game changer. We do not have anything like that in the city, so it's very hard to understand its potential effects until we see it in action. It will make a big difference based on my experience of similar facilities overseas. But I think it's got to be introduced not just on its own, but with encouragement of better shared behaviours, and I would endorse treatments like markings or signs to get some of that better behaviour encouraged as well. So things like arrows or lane markings to encourage people to keep left unless they're passing, for example. That's quite a common use overseas and seems to work pretty well in getting a good etiquette, if you like, from all path users going through there. And then there's other things like getting off the path when you're stopped and sounding out warnings and controlling your dogs and so forth. That would also be good as well. But just doing that will help. But to be honest, the 4 metres alone will make a big difference to the conflicts that are currently there. I acknowledge some of the concerns from the vision impaired community about wider paths and how that would be dealt with, and I think this is where any kind of treatments like tactile marking should certainly be looked at to help provide some kind of guiding route for vision impaired users, and I believe someone's going to talk further to that later on. We're not quite sure what demand we're going to see yet from these future major cycleways or indeed improvements to the network as a whole, and so it may be that if demand outstrips the 4 metres width, then in due course we should certainly be considering wider or separate facilities later on for walking and cycling. I would argue, though, that just automatically providing parallel facilities doesn't necessarily guarantee you're going to get separation. Quite often we already see on existing separated cycleways, things like Tennyson Street and Matai Street, I do see pedestrians quite often using those as well as an additional space. So it's not always guaranteed you're going to get that separation, especially if the two facilities look quite similar as well. I think there'd need to be quite a bit of work, quite clear demarcation to indicate which one was for pedestrians, which one was for cyclists. So it's not an easy solution that way either as well. I've heard some comment that these proposals are turning Hagley Park into a transport facility. I'd say that point is irrelevant actually, because for over 100 years Hagley Park has served as a transport connection for thousands of people a day walking and cycling through there, and will continue to do. It certainly serves me every day to get to and from work as well. So the problem has been, albeit to date, it's been with poor facilities to cater for those people. So I'll leave it there in terms of the key points I wanted to make, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you. Just with regards to the cycle lane on Selwyn Street, between, say, Brown Street and the railway lines, we have mainland paints, we have our old people's home. Probably more problematic would be the daycare next to that. We have a community butcher's, which some would argue was there before Selwyn Street. We have a dairy. We have well, the question is, with regards to the cycle lanes, on St Taurus Road, where we've focused on the riding, taken a lot of parking out, but have special areas where parks can be put in. Would that be acceptable if we put the cycle lane in, but in certain areas, especially say in front of the daycare facility, the butcher, etc., that there were parks, so the cyclists, they were designated, so the cycle lanes were safe, but there were areas where there was cycling. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's an acceptable solution in some cases to resolve the fact that there are isolated situations which are not easily dealt with by just getting rid of the parking. There's not an easy, close option. There's a cost there, but that, I think, is the cost of progress.
Thank you. Thanks for your submission. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but do you have any idea which direction most of the cyclists will come from to use Selwyn Street if there's a cycleway in there? Will they be coming from perhaps the Selwyn shops, or do you think they'll come from Morehouse Ave and swing around? Do you think there'll be a dominant route there that they'll be taking?
My suspicion would be that it would be the ones coming through from Selwyn Street further south, because if they were coming from other parts, east or west, they would probably be looking to hook into the new facilities that are going to be there at Grove Road and Antigua Street.
All right, thank you.
Glenn, I guess just what you're referring to in terms of the change of behaviour, just wondered if in fact if what we also mean is that in Christchurch we need a change of culture around transport in terms of courtesy and respect, in terms of how in fact pathways might be able to be shared better than they currently are. You've got a comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, but part of the problem is at the moment we don't provide good guidance on that. Until recently we had signs that just sort of said, look out for each other, share, which didn't really tell you anything specific. So I quite like what we're starting to see now and have seen overseas, where we start giving specific guidance like keep left unless you're passing, get off the pathway if you stop to have a chat to someone. You know, now people can start to relate to practical things they can do to actually minimise the conflicts going through, and I'd endorse doing that. And some of that can be via markings, you know, just the occasional centre line and a couple of arrows just to keep telling people just nudge over to the left, and then you don't get the whole shall we dance, which way are you going to go problems. Thank you.
Peter, is that okay? Next.